Amit. Thank you, Amit, for a very thought-provoking kind of discussion to kickstart the entire topic and setting the context. I think thanks a lot. You have done most of the job. So let me move on from there. uh, so as a customary, good morning to everybody, and thanks NHRDN for giving me this opportunity to be a part of this very prestigious national conference, which everybody looks forward to, and it's a great honor and privilege participating in this session to moderate discussions with esteemed panelists on such important subjects of redefining skilling strategy and new learning paradigm. As you all know, that the topic has assumed profound importance as organizations are accelerating their plans to digitize work processes and deploy newer technologies. As a consequence, automation and a new division of labor between humans and machines is fast disrupting the jobs across businesses, industries, and geographies. Coupled to this, COVID-19 pandemic has caused the labor market to change faster than what was expected. And it has disproportionately impacted millions of low-skilled workers. So what used to be considered the future of work, it has already arrived, thanks to pandemic. Thus, adaptation of new technology and reskilling and upskilling are some of the topmost agenda for the businesses for their existence. Increasingly, we are also witnessing the most competitive businesses are the ones that invested heavily in building skills and competencies of their people. So before I move on to seeking the viewpoints of our esteemed panelists, let me just set some of the ground rules. I would say that I'll be triggering some of the issues through some questions asked and directed towards various panelists, and I would request them to express and share their viewpoints and perspective in 2 to 3 minutes time. And at the end of that, there will be question and answer sessions for the audience. So the first thing I would like to move towards the area that, as we all know, that pandemic has accelerated many of the trends around the emerging scenarios in the world of work, which is dramatically impacting and shrinking the windows of opportunities to reskill and transition workforce into the future of the jobs. So from that perspective, my first questions would be to Dr. Tanya Mishra, that in your views, what has been your learnings in 2020? And these questions will be rotating to all the panelists for expressing their views. So starting with Dr. Tanya Mishra.
Oh, thank you very much. I'd like to first answer.
Tanya, you need to unmute yourself. I think we are not able to listen to you.
Can you hear me? I have unmuted myself.
I can hear.
Yes, okay. Able to hear now. Yes.
Okay, great. So Amitji, my answer.
There are some issues with your audio. Can I request you to ensure that you are audible? Yeah.
I'm on 100%. Can you hear me now?
Yeah. It's absolutely okay. Yeah.
So before I begin to answer you, Saptarshi, I'd like to just respond to Amitji. See, gig was always there. It depends on what part of or stage of the spectrum that the organization was in. For instance, work from home was something which we followed while I was at Accenture. I mean, years back. And now what happened is because of the pandemic, everybody went backstage and, the work from home was something, the need of the hour, but it was something which was there. As far as the gig workforce that you mentioned, again, something called liquid workforce was also there. So what this liquid workforce did is that you came in for a particular project, you volunteered for a particular project, you worked on that project, and then you moved away. So agile workforce was again something which was there, but again it came to the forefront, and I think it's about taking a very blended approach to work and what or domain or functions, and one can actually plug and play certain things as per what they want to do, and that's something which organizations were aware of, but I think it came up for discussion right now. I think what is that, we're talking about reskilling and skilling, but I think what is necessary at the moment right now is unskilling and multi-skilling, because one size doesn't fit all. So in what COVID taught us is, how do you become agile? How do you adapt? And for instance, we have operations across, and I come from a brick and mortar company, from an ITS company, where my plants were operating in full swing in Kuwait, or for that matter, in Papua New Guinea. Yes, they closed the borders, but it is something that we had to do. It was not something that we could manage remotely. So for us, it depends on what spectrum you are in and which organization you represent. But yes, what we had to do is, when our employees had COVID, we quickly ran into action. And then it was a bit about cultural integration. Didn't matter whether you were Kuwaiti or from you are Emirati or you were Italian or you were British. Everybody came together to ensure that what is the strategy to be followed. For instance, safety of employees was at the forefront. Wellness, because people were going through deep emotions. They've never experienced something like this, whether it was financial, whether it was personal, or it was professional. So these were the three things that we had to address. That is the forefront when HR goes to the occasion to understand how are employees affected. For instance, if you called up a COVID employee in Kuwait, he or she said, I don't want to speak to my family back. So you have to understand the sentiments. I think it is about rising to the occasion. There were different strategies that were followed, but I can go on. But I just want to say that, that every organization followed a different model, and what worked in the past not necessarily worked now. So it's about understanding what worked and what culture the organization is, and to have a highly blended approach. Over to you, Saptaresh.
Okay. Thank you, Tanaya, for very, very thought-provoking ideas. So let me move on to Mr. Alok Narayanji, trying to understand his perspective about what has been his, greatest learning in the year 2020.
Sure. So thanks a lot, Saptarshi and Tanaya. I think what you brought in each and every point is so very relevant.
Alok Narayanji,
so
please unmute yourself.
I have unmuted myself. Are you able to hear me, Tanaya and Amit?
Yeah.
Yes, I
okay,
can.
all right. So let me try again. Are you able to hear me now, Saptarshi ji? Okay, so
shall I repeat,
continue.
For Alok Narayanji, we would like to know that what has been your learning in 2020?
Sure. No, thanks a lot. And I think we know that is maybe one of the most relevant aspects that we are talking about, especially
Mr. Narayan,
in the world
we have lost you again. Now it's okay. Yeah.
Okay. Is it okay now? Okay. So I thought what came into play during 2020 was that
it seems there are some technical glitches. Mr. Narayan, are you able to listen to us?
We can hear him.
Yes,
but
I'm able to hear you
Narayan,
very well, and also the others.
We are not able to hear him.
We can hear him.
Okay. So there is some audio problem.
So I'm getting a confirmation
anyway, please continue.
from the audience as well that I am audible. So let me continue then. I thought some aspects that came into play very well was that, huge disruption, and it needed a very highly agile response. And I thought HR and learning, and from a skilling perspective, lots of initiatives that we would have been speaking about earlier and thinking that, okay, we have to find the time and resources to do it. It was almost as if everything got concentrated during 2020. And I had a very unique opportunity because very recently moved into becoming an entrepreneur and experiencing how organizations actually view learning, skilling, reskilling, upskilling. And during this time, what we experienced was that there were organizations, brick and mortar, into manufacturing spaces, and recognizing the fact that they could actually collaborate, they could actually working from home didn't quite become a constraint, which initially everybody thought that it was going to be. Adapting to this new reality, resourcefulness, so many aspects, and what Tanaya said is so valid, that work from home is nothing new. 20 years has been on. And that pace got accelerated. And I think it'll be very interesting to see that in terms of responses that came and how different organizations responded, how the leadership responded, how various functions got together. That is something which has been truly instructive. And that is what I would like to bring in purely from, learning, skilling, I think unlearning perhaps. So boundarylessness comes in so very strongly when I think of how we saw, in fact, so many of our clients responding to this particular need. So you actually, and one of my dreams has been in HR that when I walk into a conversation or a meeting, I'm not seen as, okay, here is the HR guy who's coming into the meeting. I'm seen as Alok who's coming in, who has the potential to value add. What will be the conversation? It can be the conversation around strategy, could be a conversation around skilling, it can be a conversation around building capability, which is going to help the organization through in the times to come. I think all of that began to happen and it began to gel and fall into place. Of course, there were aspects which did not quite work in the way it would probably expected to. But I think there were more of examples and instances where you saw that it's actually working very well. And so for now, this is what I would actually submit. And as we move forward, we can look at how it's playing out the whole, area of arena of reskilling, upskilling, and exactly what the needs are the organizations have. Saptarshi, over to you.
Yeah. So thank you, Mr. Narayan, for your views. I understand that Kanta Singh ma'am has also joined. So Kanta Singh ma'am, are you available? Can you hear us? Okay, I'm not very sure because I'm not able to see her as well as listen anything from her. So we'll move on. To Amit. Amit, you spoke quite a lot about the kind of changes which is happening, particularly looking from the perspective of skilling, upskilling, and reskilling perspective. So how can you feel the organization put the learner into the driver's seat as far as developing the skill strategy is concerned?
As I always have believed and said that it's the individual who has to own his or her own learning agenda. When the learning agenda is owned by the individual, there is a lot of ownership. I think from an organization standpoint, couple of things work here. Are you giving people the opportunity to learn the skills they want to learn and shape their career, or are you forcing them to learn the skills that you would want them to learn? And I think that's the dichotomy that one has to be very, very careful about, because a lot of time we as organizations start forcing people to learn skills we think are good for them rather than giving them the ownership to choose what they want to learn. And I think that's the differentiation that is there. Second thing that we need to look at from an individual perspective is, like I also mentioned about this whole concept of saying who is the talent, who is the trend spotter in your organization, and how do these trend spotters start the conversations across for people to know what the future would look like, because not everyone is able to have that ability to visualize the future. But are you willing to have those conversations and give people an opportunity to fail? I think that's very, very important. A lot of time people don't want to try new skills or volunteer to come forward and seek skills because they are very, very afraid of failure. How will failure be taken in my performance management? How will failure be taken in the organization? And I think those are the questions that we need to answer as we put the learner at the center of it. And that's where the whole concept of culture that I was talking about comes into being, and managing the performance aspect of it. A lot of organizations do that very well, but a lot of organizations need to start to link and label and communicate that.
Thanks Amit. I will move on to Dr. Tanaya, particularly again trying to understand her perspective about putting the learner in the driver's seat of skill strategy.
Great question, Saptarishi. I think it's a push and pull mechanism, right? So I agree with Amit that it is the onus lies on the learner, but there are certain mandatory skills which are necessary for every organization. For instance, if you are in insurance, you have to have the 100 hours of training. Or for that matter, if you're a technology company, then you have to have data privacy or phishing. Also, there are certain underlying culture. For instance, conduct counts is something. There is no sacrifice. I mean, every organization, particularly in Accenture, every employee has to go through that. Or for that matter, a POSH training, which has become mandatory. So some of the trainings are absolutely mandatory. Then what are the optional trainings that you want? As you move up in a function, you want to ensure you can't have somebody who's doing investment banking and not knowing the latest in technology, or for that matter, your technology front runner who's trying to evaluate the best software. So certain aspects are a must as part of the development of that individual. But I agree that whenever learning is forced on someone, it can have a different effect to someone where you want to learn because that is something which is essential. But again, that's optional. So learning cannot be forced on people, but like I said, it's push and pull, and there is always a bit of a carrot and stick. It depends on the organizational culture. You need to understand what is the need of that organization. So when you're saying upskilling, what do you mean by that? Or for that matter, multi-skilling. I think multi-skilling is very important because like Alok pointed out, if you want to understand or be in a conversation to discuss strategy, you need to understand strategy, or for that matter, sales. So therefore, it's inherent that every individual or every employee in the organization takes cognizance of the fact that you have to move. Adapt and change is the only reality in this VUCA world. So it's really up to you.
Thanks, Dr. Tanya. I would request Mr. Alok, what is your take on this concept of putting learner in the driver's seat of talent, skilling strategy?
All right. So I think I very strongly believe that learners actually have already taken charge, Saptarshi. And I think what is a fantastic testimony to this is if you look at enrollments into any of the MOOCs from India, we'll find that the maximum numbers actually happen to be from India in any of the MOOCs that you can think of. So be it the Udemy's, be it the Coursera, or you can think of any of the platform. So the learner, in a way, has already taken charge. I think the challenge for the organization is that what the learner's learning, are we creating an environment where they're able to apply that to the benefit of the organization as well? Otherwise, what does happen is that the learner's learning, they are learning new skills, they're enhancing their ability. But in order for them to be able to apply that, now they start looking for avenues. And I'm not only speaking of, when it comes to the technical skills or functional skills or domain-related skills. Also, when it comes to opportunities for applying your leadership ability skills in a certain environment. So the learner, interestingly, has taken charge. The question is that how is the organization going to create an ecosystem in order to make sure that those are leveraged? Now, I think I've had the privilege, I would say, of having been in, 2 organizations where the environments and culture when it came to learning was really intense. Maybe they couldn't avoid it, because they happen to be in the space of, let's say, hospitality or services. But what they ensured was that there was a learning continuum which was established. There was a very conscious plan to making sure that, the learning journey is obviously, we speak about that. We want to make sure that those are very well architected always. So even before I am thought about as a key resource as to what my next opportunity could be in terms of career growth, there is already a lot of anticipation with which the learning program, the learning architecture actually has been crafted. Now, I'll just very quickly add, there is something which we can call the organization-directed learning, what I was also referring to. There is a requirement. There is something which is mandatory, and I have to learn that. At the same time, can there also be an opportunity for self-directed learning for the learners? So there is some part that I can choose based on what vision I may have for my own career, how I wish to grow. And now I think it also has to be layered with, programs and good programs when it comes to personal growth. I think that is one aspect. If you ask me what is the key learning of the last maybe a couple of years, and very especially so during the last year itself, I think that happens to be an aspect which we've begun to pay attention to, which is about, treating the learner as a human. So if you ask me, I think the crew is all there, and the learner happens to be in the driver's seat. It's a matter of recognizing and making sure that, he or she or the learner is treated as that individual. And we also looking at making sure that there is a level of human connect, which is built with the learner as well.
Oh,
Yeah,
Thank you, Mr. Narayan. So from moving from the strategies to a point, particularly when it comes to implementing this strategy. So I would like to understand particularly that while implementing these strategies, what have been your top two challenges and of course the opportunities in terms of redefining this skill strategy, considering the fact that the way the changes are happening, digitization is happening and all the things like that. So over to Mr. Amit.
That's a great question in the terms of what are the challenges and what is the opportunities that one has held. I think the biggest, both the challenge and the opportunity is the mindset. Like all of my colleagues have said, there are mandatory and there are non-mandatory, but it's the mindset and the mindset both of an individual and the mindset I'm talking here of the organization, because it is that mindset and that focus that leads to either the success or the failure of an individual who is undergoing this whole piece of learning, relearning, reskilling, whatever we may call it. And I think that mindset needs to be changed to say why I need to do it. That's the question that starts by saying why I need to do it. Because if it is not self-driven and it is not self-initiative, then it becomes a very big issue. Even if it is self-driven and initiative, then like Alok said, you need to be able to link to say how is this going to contribute to your individual growth and contribute to the organization. Balancing that whole piece of an individual need and an organization need becomes the second challenge that we have to face when it comes to reskilling and redesigning. Because organizations drive their own agenda, individuals drive their own agenda, and they cannot, while they may not be similar, but they cannot also be at the cross purpose. And I think finding that middle ground between an individual aspiration and an organization need is both an opportunity and a challenge. And then communicating and having a discussion with the individual. I think that's where the focus lies for.
Thank you, Amit. So, Dr. Tanya, your take on the challenges and opportunities. Yeah.
Look, COVID-19 was both a challenge and an opportunity for people, right? So it depended, a lot of people saw this as an opportunity. If you look at the pharma industry and the way they grew by leaps and bounds, was phenomenal. A lot of other organizations, and I'm talking broadly at the strategic level, some organizations saw it as a nice excuse because probably top line and bottom line were not met, and they did. And when you were talking to very large corporates and governments, so pandemic was seen as a fantastic alibi to probably not meet the targets. So that was the second. The third, and a lot of organizations which did not have the kind of wherewithal looked at it in terms of what is going to be my annual business plan, what is going to be my top line, what is going to be my bottom line, and how am I going to change and be agile to ensure that I'm able to survive. For human resource professional, what first challenge was to safety of people. The next was, am I going to right size or am I going to allow people to continue? Fortunately, a lot of organizations continued with their complete manpower. The next challenge was, what am I going to do with compensation? Because, I do have people who are getting paid, but paid for a certain skill, expecting a certain outcome. So am I going to have a cut in salary or am I going to go with it? The other one was the facilities and stuff like that. So that was what was utmost in people's mind. Then was, how do I ensure that people are able to proactively and productively work from home? Because that was not something, while technology companies had the facility, brick and mortar companies did not have the facility. Then was to rise to the challenge, because a lot of employees were having this COVID positive cases. So what do you do? Then coming back to the organization. So if you are going to come back, then what is the safety measures that every organization needs to take? So these were the complete, on the ground reality that every organization had to face.
Thanks, Dr. Tanya, for sharing these challenges and opportunities. And I will move on to Mr. Narayan. for his perspective about what are the top 2 challenges and opportunities in implementing this strategy.
Sure. So it's very interesting. I came across, I thought, a very revealing data point. In fact, 2 data points. One which says that, more than 25% of the employees feel alone in developing the skills they need. And it's interesting that despite whatever may be going on with the best of intentions, 25%, and this is a survey done over a huge employee base, in fact. So over 25%, so give or take 5%, even that's a big number if you start looking at that. And then only about 8% of the senior leaders actually say that, the learning initiatives, programs actually add value. So I think this is very telling when it comes to what kind of challenges actually we are dealing with. So enrolling the learner, quite like, what we would do when it comes to, let's say, a B2C environment or a B2B environment, actually doesn't change. So there is a supply side to it and there is a demand side to it. And interestingly, on the supply side, I don't think you're likely to find at least most of the leading organizations wanting. The challenge we come across is that, by the way, we procured a whole library, be it technical skills, be it domain, functional leadership, what have you. We got 3,000 courses available, for our employees to take advantage of. What is the utilization that you're getting to? And time and again, I'm sure that it's about having this informal conversation with a colleague in any of the organizations. They're likely to say that, what, only about 5 to 6% people actually self-enroll. And we are not talking about the mandatory programs because, somebody's going to come in. You've anticipated very well how the orientation, induction, initial training, what have you is going to happen. But the moment you're talking about stuff which is where you're thinking that the learner will take initiative, you're likely to find that utilization itself, despite making significant investments, is so low. So it's almost like saying that, so what are we going to do when it comes to the demand side of the equation, for the leadership? And I think leadership also, when you talk about senior leaders, while there is a learning professional, there is the team who've got that responsibility, dedicated responsibility. They've got to do what they must do. But alongside, how are the leaders actually encouraging? How are they making sure? How are they enrolling, the employee or the learner or the potential learners that we have into this process? So I think it's a matter of very creatively looking at it because that is something which is likely to make a big difference as well. I think relevance of what we offer and relevance, again, how that is seen and determined, by the learners. Are scores of self-paced learning courses, are they impactful in the way you're looking at those? So learning strategies, beautifully architected, nicely strategized, but now when it comes to engaging the larger group, and I think what Amit had pointed out, initially when he spoke of the individual learner, it's almost like, I'm thinking of how you catch a fish. You can decide to throw a net, and what you're likely to catch is not only fish, but all kinds of garbage. Lots of plastic will come into your net. But then the nicest way maybe and the difficult way to catch a fish is that, you stand in that stream and you tickle the fish to come right into your palm. So it's almost like that you're capturing the imagination of the learners and making them partners in that, growth journey, learning journey that we have.
If I may,
thanks, Dr. Narayan, for drawing a simile with the, fishing nets. Yeah.
Saptarishi, if I may cut in, I completely agree with you, Alok, because I think, I'm brought to this expression that we learned as children, water everywhere, but not a drop to drink. It is like, there are courses and courses, but there is confusion amongst the learner as to what is to be taken. That's number one. Number two, as organization, we invest a lot saying that, okay, this is what is necessary. But when it's a question of self-learning, it never happens. Unless, the organization says that, look, you need to finish these. Otherwise, you will not get your increment or appraisal or something like that, which is the stick attached that people will suddenly, end of that March 31st, you find everybody.
Right.
So,
absolutely. And Saptarshi, do allow me to quickly chime in there. So it's almost like, we are so obsessed with what I'll call a very input-oriented approach. So what are we investing? So, if you ask any learning function sometimes, or HR, or doesn't matter, whichever organization, this is what we have as our learning infrastructure. These are number of courses we have, this is what we have. However, the moment it comes to what sort of an outcome orientation you're likely to find. So what is the impact of that? And I'm sure, Amit, as you now lead a business, you would say, okay, guys, don't tell me what you're doing. Tell me, what are you accomplishing? How many leaders will you give me in the next, 6 months, 1 year, 2 years? What does your pipeline look like? What is the level of readiness that you have there? 60, 70, 80%? How do you determine that? I think those are aspects we've got to be looking at and saying, okay, so it's almost like, we know it theoretically that it is the end state that we are aspiring to get to. That should be driving whatever actions we are speaking of, and then see how to move that across. Yeah.
I absolutely agree with you, Alok, and to the point that what would be the ask from the function, but I also agree to your earlier point that you had mentioned to say, and I wanted to add there, saying that the tone has to be set at the top. And I don't know
absolutely
how many of us would have the courage to stand up in a town hall and say, I took training to upskill myself because at this stage of my career, I thought I needed to do this and relearn and unlearn. And I think that's where the number of unique and individual learners get motivated to do more.
Absolutely.
And I think that's from the leadership of the org.
Absolutely. I think it's wonderful. And as we move forward, particularly looking from the perspective of the kind of scenario which is emerging in the year 2021, what do you feel is your agenda for co-creating a new learning paradigm? So I'll start with Amit again.
I think, like everyone else has said, COVID has made us realize that there are different ways for us to do business. We have to adopt the newer ways to do business, from the earlier way. And I did mention in my own talk about how we've looked at prospecting to be very, very different. So insurance as an industry was always focused on servicing customers through digitally enabled means and renewing customers through digitally enabled means. I think for us, the paradigm shift now is how do we inbuild into our process the whole prospecting piece of a customer, which is far more digital oriented and far more customer focused than what it earlier was. So, the challenge that I said, how do we build trust virtually? I think that's the biggest focus that we would have. And how do we then gather? That's the first. Second, I think from a product standpoint, while the awareness of insurance has increased, and whether it's life or health, I think the customer demands in terms of product today has also changed in the last 12 months than it was previously. And I think that awareness is good, and that brings us the challenge for us to be able to now make products which are not run-of-the-mill standard, but how does it give the customer a menu of choice as to what the customer wants? For example, if you take a term and you are at 50 years of age, you may want us to dial down your cover over a period of time. And if you are a 25-year-old who's taking a term product, you may want to dial up the cover as you grow. Do we give that flexibility? And, we work with the regulators to do that. That's where the whole shift would be to say, what is our customer demanding? How do we get the new customer, and where is the new customer? And then how do we bring that in to be able to look at capability and develop that capability? And the time spans have become shorter. So, you don't have 5 years or 3 years. You now have 6 to 9 to 12 months at most to bring that capability in and get that advantage. I think that's the challenge.
Thanks, Amit. Over to Dr. Tanya about the agenda part of.
I think 2021 is, norming, forming, storming, and performing. I think we finished norming, forming, and storming. I think this is now the performing. So I think 2020, the end of 2020 was all about, understanding what will work and what will not work. I think one size doesn't fit all. I think it's about having different approaches to each one of the stakeholders, which means that what do the customers require in this new age or stage in life? Because the shift has happened even for customers. Then for the employees, what is the new ask for the employees? So therefore, how do we as human resources, as people managers, because even Amit is a people manager as the CEO. I mean, it is just not the support function. And also what is necessary for the new employee as, are the employees future ready? Are they agile? What is going to be the new kind of technology that is going to come in? So at the leadership, evaluating what is really out there. Then the board members, what are the board really expecting? And then finally, top line, bottom line, and AVP. So I think the entire organization has to move hand in hand to move towards that one particular goal of what is the future looking like, and having organizations which are future ready to be able to deal with, maybe COVID, maybe Black Lives Matter, or Trump election, or anything that is happening, or the farmers Kisan Andolan which is happening. So I think it's about being agile as organizations.
Thank you, Dr. Tania. Moving over to Mr. Narayan, what do you feel should be the agenda for 2021?
Sure. Yeah, I think completely agree that agility in whatever we do, envision, agility has to be perhaps the hallmark of a very key aspect of what we do. And I'm going to borrow quote from, I thought, a very interesting paper that I came across. This is a short piece, a McKinsey article saying, thriving after COVID-19. And I think they have structured it beautifully in the way they outline it. They say that, in terms of skills that are required, which are very clearly, and no surprises there. I mean, that is the theme of our conference as well. And it very clearly outlines that, those 4 building blocks, if you like, there may be a variation in terms of what levels, what profiles, may need how much of what. But it says that, there is digital. So it's almost like, Alok, do you even need to say that? Digital is understood. Then there is social and emotional. I think that is something which has come into play big time. And I think a lot of times in the edited and refined versions of what COVID meant and how we all came together, resilience, empathy, all of that, I think in that edited and refined version, we may not actually have taken enough account of what the social and emotional would mean. Adaptability, and finally resilience. I think those 4 aspects very clearly what this article brought out, and it was very instructive for me. And interestingly, on many of those, actually what happens is that organizations are definitely doing something. Question is that, is it a structured approach, or is it something that just happened to be, just happenstance? Now, happenstance is obviously not okay. The whole idea is to make sure that there is a process around it, there is a discipline in it. So I thought those 4. Now, the interesting part is, what we spoke of earlier, which is to do with the learner engagement, which is about getting the learners excited. And that is what I read in your question, Saptarshi, when you said that, co-creation. So co-creation as a way to accomplish what we wish to, I think has to be underlined, and you can underline it as many times as we want. And that is the way to get to what we wish to get to, because otherwise we are not going to be able to capture the imagination of folks that we have. And again, a very interesting data point, which is to do with LinkedIn Workplace Report 2020. 99% of L&D executives believe that if skill gaps are not closed, it is going to have a huge impact on effectiveness in every possible way, in every constituency. And again, no surprises. This is something we know intuitively and otherwise as well. But I think this is one aspect that, if today my employee, my team member, frontline, or the mid-management or the leader don't recognize that, digital and the processes will actually bring in redundancy if we are not getting reskilled, or in certain cases, the upskilling is not happening. So I thought those 4 blocks very clearly, which are key. And then looking at the way to get to it actually happens to be through co-creation.
Thanks, Dr. Narayan, for raising some of the very pertinent issues. And as we moved and proceed towards the concluding part of these sessions, so very quick round of one-word answer. So I would like to understand from each of the panelists as to what is your mantra for institutionalizing skilling as an integral part of your organization culture. So over to Amit. Start with.
I think the mantra for me is people want to improve. They want accountability, but they also want to know that you are on their side when they are reskilling, and you will provide them the right tools and the platform to be able to reskill. I think that whole communication piece of safety from failure, that I think is the mantra.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Amit. Over to Dr. Tanya.
Openness and adaptability to change.
Wonderful. Openness and adaptability to change. And finally to Mr. Narayan.
So I'm going back to what I learned during my school days. So we had borrowed from one of the shlokas, which was Yogaha Karmasu Kaushalam. So striving for excellence.
Okay.
So things will keep changing, but that's what we engage ourselves with, this pursuit of excellence. And for the learning, I think, sorry, I'm, maybe putting in a little more here, which is,
please proceed.
Make that learning real life and real time, whatever we do. So it has to be real life, it has to be real time. Then only it will, bring in the rewards that we are looking for.
So thank you, Mr. Narayan. And I think it had been a wonderful discussions with all the esteemed panelists which we had. And I'm quite sure that it must have provoked a lot of thoughts, a lot of insights which we have gained through this kind of discussions. And it will definitely help the HR professionals and also the business leaders to truly take note of these and act on them so that we can leverage the benefit of this. And as Amit had always been saying that, it is not only the process, but what the outcome is. So outcome is important. So as we draw learning and significant learning from this kind of sessions, I think that will be the real success of these sessions. We are also apologizing. Some of our panelists could not make it because of some technical glitches. So we could have had their viewpoints also. So now it's a time for question answer sessions. So I will hand it over to Mr. Anand for conducting this Q&A session. Over to Mr. Anand.
Saptarshi, Alok, Dr. Tanya, and Amit, thank you very much for such an insightful session. There are many, many questions which came in the chat, and I have picked a few of them. But I also see Ravikant Reddy, and if he's our own Ravikant Reddy from Hyderabad, he has raised hand for a question. I'm handing over the mic for him to ask his question directly to all of you, and then I'll pick up the questions from the chat. So Ravikant Reddy, if you're around, I'm giving you the mic if you can speak. Can you see Ravikant getting loaded on the screen? He's coming on stage with us.
Yes. Wow.
Actually,
Hi Ravikant.
I can't see anything.
You are on stage. Get going.
We did transpose.
Amit, we can see you well, and we can also see the broad smile as well. So keep smiling.
Yes.
Ravikant, go ahead with your question. Ravikant, we can't hear you. If you can hear us, please go ahead with your question. Otherwise, I'll pause it and we go to the next question for now. So team, one question, and this comes from Meenakshi. What she is saying that while all these interventions are being taken during the COVID time, and most of them are in the remote environment, what sort of measurement of impact all of you are seeing in your respective roles and in your respective world, and do you have certain measurements which you are tracking yourself against? So if any one of you can respond to this question from Meenakshi.
So Meenakshi, I come from a brick and mortar. We really, excepting probably for corporate office, where we had daily targets, weekly targets, and monthly targets to achieve, and which we monitor, and that was completely it was metrized driven. But apart from that, we had a very brick and mortar industry, and the client where the client calls the shots. So we were very much there, despite all through COVID, in all the locations.
Thanks, Dr. Tanya. Second question coming from Prasanjit, and maybe Amit, if you want to take that. His question is that while the reskilling is happening and there is a lot of MOOC courses and things like that, what do you see is the future of a role of an L&D in the organization in these changing times?
I think from when I part of HR, I think it has to play the wider role of saying, can it be an internal consultant to the whole organization and the leadership to be able to drive an agenda that meets each and every department and functional need. Like many of my panelists have said, we get into this whole mindset of saying this is a mandatory training and we will take the onus of doing it. And at times we leave that whole piece of saying it's an individual learner training. We have provided the input. We will not, and the tools, we will not bother on the output and the utilization because it's for individual to do. And I think that whole combination needs to come in. I would be very appreciative if my L&D leader was at the forefront of asking and challenging the business leaders as to what skills he or she as the team sees which would be required 18 months or 20 months down the line, and how we are doing it to drive that agenda within. Look at the customer, look at the market, look at the ecosystem, whether it's the economy, whether it's everything else. Try and connect all the dots for the organization, and then bring forth a program or a plan which encompasses all of it to be able for the organization to be sustainable in the long run. I think that's the ask that I would have of the L&D focus. While all the mandatory stuff is important and is needed to do, but I think that's where the larger leap for me comes.
Amazing, Amit. Thank you very much. Next question coming from Mandeep, and Mandeep is asking that what you guys see as a role of HR business partner, keeping in mind the aspirations of the organization leaders and the aspirations of employee or managing employee experiences. So basically a dichotomy where maybe an organization may want to work on reskilling or restructuring, whereas employees have different aspirations. So any one of you want to respond on that?
Sure, I'm happy to do that. So I think the HR business partners perhaps wear 2 or 3 hats. One, they need to be fantastic cheerleaders, and they've got to be learning facilitators in a way that they actually take on the custodianship of what is happening, where the training or learning programs are landing, because they are meant to be the trusted partners working very closely with the business leaders. And with the way the landscape is changing, and the fact that the HR delivery aspect, in many organizations, no longer part of what the HR business partners got to do. And if that be the architecture and that's how the function structured, then the HR business partner, finally, if you really look at it, actually becomes the talent development partner for the business. And looking at it strategically, making sure that, okay, what is going to come up in the next 18 months, 24 months, 36 months? What is the agenda then? Making sure that the reskilling, upskilling, that is something which is going on, because, after that, what is remaining is the execution of it. So along with the talent management, talent development, if that agenda is agreed and the leadership and the HR leaders are calibrated on this is what needs to be accomplished, I think then it's really making sure that the milestones are defined and we are making progress as per the milestones that are defined. In case something has to be changed and any deviation has to be done, you're part of that conversation and saying, okay, you know what, it's not A which is going to work, we've got to move to B. And now what will that B entail? Defining that and making sure that once again the effort is appropriately sort of redirected, making sure that those priorities then, they get accomplished.
So Anand, I believe
Yeah, look.
HRBP is very much like a catalyst. They are the really
Yes.
on the ground. They have the ears on the ground. They're the ones who advise, saying, what is correct, what is working, what is not working. So they are really the last end and very, very crucial, because they're the ones, any kind of change. And it's not just now, they always have been. Anytime that there has always been a change in anything, whether when Accenture went from performance management to performance achievement, these were the people who are really the pallbearers or the torch bearers, who actually say what is going to work, what is not working. So they play a very, very crucial role, and they are really the catalysts and the change agents and the torch bearers. So I salute to all the HRBPs.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you, Dr. Tanya. Saptarshi, before we take more questions, we have Kanta Singh with us. Welcome, Kanta ma'am. Saptarshi, if you want to get her views briefly, and then maybe we can take last couple of questions, and proceed further.
Okay. So welcome to this session, Madam Kanta Singh. Unfortunately, we could not get you when the discussions were going on. So we would just very quickly capture your perception about the important topic like skilling strategy. How do we redefine it, and what kind of new paradigms are emerging in this changing business environment? So over to Kanta Singh, madam.
You're on mute, Kanta ma'am, if you can unmute yourself.
Thank you, Anand, and thank you, Saptarshi sir. Thank you and I struggled a lot. In fact, this is the first time I'm logging in onto this system. I don't even know how to pronounce it. So we are so used to Zoom and Team and whatnot. So it took me some time. Sorry about that. And I was in a different session before this. So the skilling, when we're talking about skilling, the country is struggling, to be honest. We have, and I'm talking about domain training. And domain training, when I'm saying, because, and the primary reason for that is that it's not a demand-led training. We are training people for job roles which probably are not even required in the market. So I always say this, that unless Anand tells me what he needs in his company and he's part of the training, we will not be able to get it right. And here also I'm saying, the parameters are different for boys and girls and men and women. Women, firstly, are not mobilized the way they should be. Their families are not involved. They just because they get 10,000 rupees. I'm talking about entry-level jobs. Just because they get 10,000 or 12,000 rupees, they will not be able to shift. And we need to understand why. And that also needs to change, because living in a city with 10,000 rupees is not sufficient. Men probably they can live for 4-5 other people, they can manage, but women have safety as one of the major concerns. Safety at workplace, safety at the place where they live, transportation, mobility, and that's a genuine threat. We cannot deny that, and employers will need to think about some of those issues that and the structural barriers that women face in joining the workforce. And skilling and lack of skilling is one of the major ones there. Our training is not sufficient, it is not affordable, it is not quality training, and we need to think about some of those issues. And I hope the new scheme that has just been launched has factored in some of those things that we could not achieve in the last scheme of things. I'm looking forward to some cooperation from HR leaders like yourselves to also pay attention to training of people, particularly women and girls, because the number of women in the workforce is going down for a long time now. We are post-COVID, we are just about 19%, and who knows what kind of data is there, and they'll be the last ones to join back now because of the family reasons, because of the children's responsibilities, because of lack of time to even attend skill trainings. So we need your support. We want you to come forward and volunteer to hire more women, because without women, I don't think we'll be able to achieve what the country is set to achieve. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Kanta ma'am. Saptarshi, we have one more question, and maybe after that we can conclude. And this, maybe all the panelists can respond. What are the key leadership skills, this particular team believes one need to develop in the post-pandemic era? Saptarshi.
I think some issue with the
Audio for Saptarshi?
Yeah. I think
Okay.
it was not audible. Yeah. Now it's okay.
Key leadership skills, one needs to develop to deal with the post-pandemic scenarios. Maybe some of you can respond, and we can treat that as a last question, Saptarshi, from this session.
So I'll go first. I think, I'm not, the continuation of the business related or decision making skills are there. But I think as leaders, what we need to imbibe, for me, there are three things which are important. One is to be present in the post-COVID world. Second, being open to being vulnerable. I think that's very, very important. How we are able to deal with our own vulnerability sets the tone for the team to be vulnerable, to be present. You have to be there for the team as and when that is required. And the third is to be authentic, not only from your own self, but to be able to see the authenticity that comes to your table from the other person on why they could not or not do certain things. I think those are the three skills I feel, besides the regular business leadership skills that leaders need to develop to be able to get the workforce to the level that they would want to in the post-COVID era. That's my response.
Thanks a lot.
Yeah, let me also contribute to this. To my mind, I think post-COVID, one of the greatest leadership skills what a great leader must acquire is to take care of the people and extend support for the people to grow. So that is what a kind of helping hand extended to the workforce to learn newer skills and helping them grow would be one of the major, I believe, leadership skills one need to actually take note of.
Excellent. So Saptarshi, if you want to have any concluding remarks, then please go ahead, and then we'll close the session.
I think everything has already been said, and there is not much left for anything to add on that. I would only say that it had been a wonderful conversation, despite initial challenges of technology. But at the end of the day, the session could do justice with the kind of responsibility which was entrusted to it. So thank you very much. Thank you all participants for being with us, for joining us, and making this session a great session. Thanks all panelists, Anand and Kanta Singh Man, because we could not get you earlier. So thanks a lot to everybody.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, everyone.